Chapter 7. Laura woke up around 6 in the morning. She knew what time it was because that's what time she'd been waking up for half a decade. She sat up and looked around, trying to process her surroundings. She swore she had smelled coffee, but the aroma quickly faded in the wind, replaced by the rotting, putrid stench of the ghoul's empty shack. The stink startled her to her feet. She had forgotten where she was. A shudder ran up her spine, like her body was trying to dislodge the disgust. Stepping out from under the awning into the sun's warmth made a world of difference. It wasn't like she was afraid of the dark or anything, but the light always seemed to ground her. All the better to hunt with. The sky was littered with powder-white clouds. It was one of Azzy's favorite mediums, cloud riding, so she took a moment to check. Sometimes the shapes were very explicit, a scene depicted or even a no-nonsense arrow, but today the sky looked pretty ordinary. A streak on the horizon resembled a dragon, maybe, but that was meaningless. She was about to turn away to continue her pursuit of the ghoul when the wind picked up. The patterns in the sky began drifting northward, opposite the wagon trail. No, come on. She kicked the side of the house. She would never catch that fucker if she turned back now. One of the clouds began to morph and she focused on it, willing it into a southerly pointing finger or something. A poof broke off and stretched into the vague likeness of a grinning white theater mask. She almost had to squint to see it, and it faded as quickly as it materialized, but before she could rationalize it away, her pocket started to hum. She whipped out the little blue mirror and flipped it open. The distorted image of that little vamp girl smiled up at her. "Hi, Laura," she said. "What does he want?" Evie's sweet demeanor did not falter. "He said something about a major lead." "What a coincidence." Laura angled the mirror to show the shack behind her. "He said to come right away." Laura sighed. "Wonderful." The vamp smiled again. "There's some people here. 3 guys from Earth." Like Laura gave half a fuck. "Oh boy, lucky me, lucky them." "I knew you'd be excited." Laura hung up. Better to get this over with as fast as possible. She put the mirror away and headed north. Heartless fetched 3 keys from the reception desk while Jake and Al helped Ken back to his feet. He seemed much more stable than he had before, and gently detached himself from their support. Jake bet that Al's go-fast pills probably helped a lot. The masked man returned a second later and led the boys to a stairwell at the end of the hall. They climbed up after him, emerging at the end of another, longer hallway which was lined on either side by numbered doors. Along the right wall were odd numbers, with evens on the left. They continued a little more than halfway down the hall, where H stopped and handed each of them a numbered key. Ken got room 6, Jake got 7, and Al was given the key to room 8. "Now," said H, "it's not much, but it's better than sleeping in a tree." He let out a hearty laugh and continued. "If you get hungry or have questions in general, ask Evie at the front desk. Unfortunately," he went on, "I've got some things to take care of, so I'll be exiting stage right." He smiled widely and clasped Jake on the shoulder. "You have no idea how much you've helped me. Please, I really mean it when I say, make yourselves at home." He released Jake from his clutches in turn, chuckling happily to himself all the way to room 1. Jake looked at the others. It felt like they'd been on the world's longest and most intense roller coaster, and they were just now setting their feet back on solid ground. He wondered if he might cry. "Well," he said, "you seem cool." "You seemed insane," Ken said low, rubbing his newly bandaged shoulder. "Kind of both," said Al. "I don't know about you," said Ken, "but I'm fucking beat." Jake was suddenly acutely aware of his own aching wounds. It was like a balloon deflated. He sighed and nodded. "No kidding." Al nodded too, yawning. He held out his key and stuck it in the door marked 8. "Let's check out the accommodations." That sounded like a great idea. The other 2 unlocked their own doors. Jake said night and entered room 7. He heard Al respond, "You mean morning," as he shut the door. It wasn't nothing too impressive, just a small, comfortable room with a bed and a dresser with a tiny little private bathroom built into the corner. He headed straight for the bed, dropped his backpack on the floor, and collapsed face first into the soft mattress. He lay there for a few comfortable moments, legs dangling over the edge, before remembering his spoils from the ogre's house. He pulled the bottle from his pack and took a long pull of the bittersweet liquid. He capped the bottle, set it on the bedside table, and crawled under the sheets. It was a troll, he remembered, almost in Al's voice. A troll, not an ogre. He quickly fell asleep. Kenneth jumped awake. He swore he'd heard something, but there was nothing. No phantom sirens, no screaming alarm, just silence. He lay back down slowly, careful not to agitate the swollen, throbbing wound on his shoulder. So it wasn't a dream. After a moment, the sound returned, causing his body to tense. That's what had awoken him, a gentle rapping at his door. He didn't know how, but he was sure that it wasn't human knuckles producing that sound. He continued to lay there, uncomfortably still. Some part of him emerged from the inky depths of subconscious. It assured him that everything was okay, and he gingerly pushed himself off the bed and to his feet. There was no sort of peephole on the door, so he was forced to open it. He stepped back as the figure strode into the room. It took him a minute to process what he was seeing, but once he did, that unquiet feeling returned. Before him stood something reminiscent of a man, but it was all wrong, like that mutant dog that had torn his arm to shreds. The man thing had short, stubby legs and long, spindly arms ending in equally spindly fingers. Its face was smashed and gross like some nocturnal creature, with pointed ears and sharp fangs. Kenneth stumbled backwards and fell on his ass, letting out a pathetic little whoop of terror. The creature held up its horrible hands in a show of good faith. "Oh dear, I'm terribly sorry." The creature spoke in the most posh and refined manner Kenneth had ever heard. He stepped forward and extended an arm. "Let me help you up, my boy." Kenneth was unsure which part of the mutant hand he was meant to take hold of, as if I'd even want to, so he shook his head and pushed himself off the floor with his good arm. The creature took a step back and sighed. "Really?" it said. "I ought to know better by now." It straightened itself up and adjusted its tie. "Oh my God, it's wearing a suit. Nosferatu, attorney at law." It extended its arm once again, this time only presenting its wretched index finger. "Let's try again, shall we? I'm soulless of HSB. You may address me as S if you so desire." After having met the masked man downstairs, and now this, Kenneth had the uncanny feeling that he'd somehow fallen into some bizarre picture book. He didn't want to be rude, so he quickly shook the creature's outstretched finger. He let go and immediately found himself asking, "So what does the B stand for, brainless?" The creature's eyes lit up and it burst out laughing. Generous to call that noise a laugh. "That's exactly right, Mr. Bronfield," it said. "Heartless, soulless, and brainless magical research and development at your service." I guess they don't have a marketing department. Kenneth smiled awkwardly. The creature smiled back. "I was informed by my associate that you are..." It paused. "Well, you've met with a particularly nasty fate, yes?" Kenneth looked at his own shoulder. "I guess you could say that." Solus nodded solemnly. "May we sit?" Kenneth realized that he'd been locking his knees. He nodded and gestured to a chair by the dresser, setting himself down on the edge of the bed. The creature sat. Its feet didn't reach the floor, but the fingers of one arm did. It smiled, and Kenneth got the distinct impression that this creature was in fact a man, or at least it had been at one point. The creature seemed to read his face and nodded. "You and I share something in common, dear Kenneth." He adjusted himself. "I too went through an uncomfortable transformation at a point in my life. You see, I'm a vampire by birth, but as I'm sure you have seen by now..." He paused for clarification. "You met my niece downstairs, correct?" Kenneth nodded. "Of course. As you've seen, this is not a common form for my kind to take. The result of an accident. Suffice it to say, it is a curse of my own creation." "Oh," said Kenneth. "I'm sorry." S shook his head. "Oh, it's quite all right, really. That's not the point." He swallowed and took a deep breath. "Your life is about to become, shall we say, Kafkaesque. Complicated at the very least. I'm here to offer my services. If another wolf were around, he or she might have more to offer you. As it stands, I'm the next best thing." He chuckled. "We work with what we've got in this place." "So you want to be my therapist?" The bat laughed again. "Hardly," he said. "No, I'm afraid that I'm rather underqualified for that position." He adjusted himself restlessly. "You see, young Kenneth, I've had friends like you in my many years on this..." He scanned the room as if searching for the right words. "Dust mote in space. Friends with whom I share my everyday, and others still whose faces have long since faded from my aging memory. That is all I offer. Friendship." Kenneth nodded uncertainly. He decided to ask out of courtesy, delicately indicating S's body with a wave. "May I ask what sort of dark arts twisted my form into the wretched beast that sits before you?" Kenneth shrugged. "A prudent question, child. What fool would shake hands with such a monster without knowing said monster's genesis?" He laughed with a gleam in his eye, wagging an awful finger. "Not Mr. Bronfield, that's who." Kenneth waited while S made his funny little body more comfortable in the chair. "Oh shit, did I just ask for his life story?" "Well now," said S, almost to himself, "that is quite a yarn. Let us leave it for another day, shall we?" Kenneth relaxed. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories or anything. Hardly. You're quite inculpable for my misfortunes. He smiled hideously but kindly. Did any of that help? Kenneth had no idea how any of this was meant to be helpful, but he could appreciate the sentiment. He nodded. Actually, yeah, it did. He smiled at the man. Suddenly, his lip began to tremble and tears ran silently down his chin. God, I'm pathetic. He cleared his throat assertively. Excuse me, sorry about that. Poppycock. Dare apologize one more time and then you shall be sorry, young man. S appended a /S to his words with a chuckle. Right. Kenneth felt phantom bugs on his arms trying to burrow into his gut. I gotta take a piss. Very well, said S, hopping down from the chair. Before the door, he paused, turned around with a smile, and said, If you should need anything at all, please feel free to visit me. I abide in room 2, just up the hall. He bowed dramatically and exited the room, leaving Kenneth alone with his thoughts. Jake felt a lot better after a decent sleep. Based on the golden light pouring in through the window, he guessed it was around 3 in the afternoon. He rose and stretched. His ribs were still sore, and his arm was still throbbing, but his head felt cool and clear. He spied the bottle of liquor on the bedside table and immediately took a swig. The stuff burnt his throat on the way down, but it was a good burn, like muscles during a workout. He corked the bottle and got to his feet. There was no sound but the chirping of birds outside. He took a deep breath and let the sleep fade from his mind, opting for another small sip before heading downstairs. He stopped on the way to peek into the others' rooms, but they were still snoozing, so he continued to the lobby by himself. The vampire girl was still sitting behind the reception desk. She saw him emerge from the hallway and smiled, showing her fangs. The sight sent a glittery shiver up Jake's spine, and he couldn't help but smile back. Feeling better? She asked. Jake nodded. He leaned on the desk, taking a second to read the confusing nameplate in front of her. He sounded it out. Venica, is that right? That's me, she said. Most people call me Evie. Cute. I don't think we've had the pleasure. She extended a pale, slender hand. S told me your names. You're Jacob, right? It's just Jake, he said. Who's S? Oh, she said. My uncle. He works with H. Sorry, I assumed you'd met. Ah, said Jake. He quickly worked it out in his head. HSB, that's initials? She nodded. Yep. So, where do you come from, just Jake? Farview. She looked confused. Farview, Utah, he clarified. She didn't respond until he added, United States of America. Oh, her eyes lit up. She leaned in and whispered, You're from Earth. Yes, he said cautiously. Why? He suddenly realized the obvious truth. If nobody back home knew about this place, it probably worked both ways. Where are we? He asked. She frowned. HSB? No, he laughed. I mean, what country? Ah, didoy, Evie. She chuckled, slapping her forehead. It's called Agrima. Avalon? Oh no, that's miles away. Jake laughed, not knowing whether she was kidding. She giggled madly, then leaned her elbows on the counter, chin resting on her hands. What's it like on the other side? Jake scrambled for a way to make his shitty little hometown sound interesting. Inspiration struck him. Boring, he said. Not enough pretty little vampires. She gasped and held a hand up to hide her grin. Jake had always thought blushing was just something cartoons did, but this girl's pale cheeks went bright red. The feeling of triumph made his head swim. A moment later, Alan stumbled into the lobby, still yawning. He wordlessly slipped a go pill into Jake's hand and took a look around the room. Where are the goblins? He asked. Hey, yeah, said Jake. Have you seen them? Nikki, that's what Jake decided he was going to call her, swallowed a drink from a bottle of thick red fluid. They're in the kitchen. She pointed over her shoulder to the other hallway leading out from the lobby. I guess it's their Glar now. Glar? Like their home, she said. It's a goblin word. They don't really translate well into English. I thought their home was Max's place, Al said. She shrugged. Guess he didn't like it there. I got the impression he owned them or something. She raised an eyebrow. You can't own people in this country. Al was flustered. Or not in America, either. That's good. Jake laughed. I mean, she added, it's not like people don't try. It was uncanny. As soon as she said that, there was a heavy knock on the door and a muffled, horribly familiar voice on the other side. Nikki frowned and got up from the chair. She strode to the door and opened it. jumping back with a stifled eep as the mammoth face stared in at her. Max was crouched in the doorway like a grown man inspecting a dollhouse. He pursed his lips and made a low, impatient sound. Nikki straightened herself and smiled at the visitor. "Welcome to HSB," she said. "How may I help you?" The troll sniffed and grunted. He ignored the little vampire, instead looking over his shoulder at the humans.
"So," he said, "are you coming to my home as guests? Eat my food and smile like a friends, and then leave in the night with my brownies?"
Jake was perplexed. He struggled to form a response in his adrenaline-addled mind. Luckily, a voice from behind saved him the trouble.
"Max,"
Heartless called, striding into the lobby.
"God, is that you? How long's it been? 2 years? 3?
He stopped when he was between the troll and the vampire. A bright, cordial smile spread across his mask. Max growled and reached his trunk of an arm through the doorway, swinging blindly at Heartless.
"Whoa, doggy!"
H cried, leaping out of the way just in time. He stumbled, but caught and steadied himself against the reception desk.
"What's the big idea, friend? You almost clocked me there."
Max roared and slammed his fist down on the floor.
"My brownies! What you done with them?"
"As nice as that sounds," H said, "if someone stole brownies from your place, I'm sure they've already been eaten.
I could ask the cook to whip you up something."
The troll looked over his shoulder and furrowed his brow.
"Yeah," H went on. "Matter of fact, he just got some new assistants. 3 little..."
He slapped his forehead.
"Brownies, of course."
Max thrashed.
Yeah, mine."
Heartless chuckled.
"Now hang on a sec. I must have misheard, because it sounded like you were saying that something was stolen." "Don't play with me, Oranta,"
Max growled.
"It's just... goblin trafficking is not something one would want to implicate oneself in. Especially not a member of the guard. I mean, you heard what the Queen did to those carnies from Broughton last summer, didn't you?"
The troll snorted dismissively. Without warning, Heartless cocked a knee back, then kicked. His foot struck Max's knuckles with a loud crack. The troll recoiled, pulling his arm out of the doorway. He made no sound, but it was clear that he was hurt. Heartless marched through the doorway and stood before the troll, wide power stance. Jake was sure Max was about to take another swing at the man, but he didn't. Heartless raised a gloved finger and shook it at the intruder.
"Now you listen here, you lummox," he said. "If those dogs want to leave with you, I can't stop them. But I will not abide bullying, especially not on my own damn property. Do you understand me?"
Max regarded him contemptuously.
"Oh, I understand you well, Udarishoda."
He met Heartless's gesture with his own huge finger.
"When I return, I don't think I will find you so brave, little man."
H raised his hands and cowered mockingly. The troll ignored him, turned, and began climbing down the winding stone staircase. It was hard to tell from where Jake stood, but it looked like H flashed the up yours sign with his fist. As he walked back inside and shut the door, the palpable tension that had filled the room began to melt away. Jake whooped and slapped his knee.
"That was insane!"
Al whispered, "Holy shit, I thought we were about to get eaten." Heartless just shook his head and began walking to his left, down the second hallway beside the reception desk. Nikki motioned for the boys, and they all followed. The kitchen was through an open doorway on the left. It was a medium-sized, pretty normal-looking kitchen. A round, beefy man stood at the counter kneading dough, his back facing the entrance. Scurrying around the room, cleaning, organizing, slicing, and wrapping, were the 3 goblins. The little one, Whimsy, turned out to look at the visitors. She dropped what she was doing and scampered over to them. At Heartless's feet, she did a cute little bow where she grabbed her antennae with both hands and pulled them down.
"Oh," said H, "no, none of that, please."
Whimsy stood up straight and released her antennae, which bounced up like they were spring-loaded.
"Yes, no, not that,"
she said. She turned to the other goblins and said something in their language. Wit and Wart looked up from their tasks. The fat one just nodded and grunted in her gravelly voice, then returned to sweeping the floor. Wit brushed some debris from her hands and strolled over. She nodded to each of them and said,
"Isn't it nice here?"
Jake and Al agreed.
"Where's the pup?"
Jake was confused only for a moment. "Sleeping," he said. "At least he was when I checked." She nodded as if satisfied.
"So," said Al, "you all work here now?"
Whimsy nodded.
"Here's our glar now." "They're not employees, if that's what you're asking," said H.
The large man, without turning around, said, "Not that they'd be getting paid much if they were." Heartless laughed. The man slowly raised a middle finger.
"That's Roger," said H. "Longtime employee of ours."
Still kneading, Roger said, a little too convincingly, Please help, I'm being kept prisoner. My family thinks I'm dead.
You have no family,
Spat H. He turned to the unlaughing humans.
Actually, he has a brother in the city. He and his wife bring their kids to visit sometimes. He's lying!
Jake noticed Whimsy's face, which looked genuinely horrified at this exchange. His eyes met hers, and he shrugged, smiling. She relaxed a bit, but continued regarding the men with narrow eyes. So, said Jake, you're getting free goblin labor.
Well, yes, H explained. But you've got to realize that goblin society operates a lot differently than what you're used to.
They're like insects, Al said. It seems like they're eusocial, like ants. Heartless's surprise was clear on his mask.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, said Jake. So they're bugs. That means they have less rights?
Fewer,
Alan mouthed. Heartless sighed and pressed his palms together as if praying to some god of patience.
Jacob, he said slowly, this region is ruled by a goblin monarchy. You understand?
So they're lower-class goblins.
Yes, exactly. They're genetically lower class.
Before Jake could rebuke, Nikki spoke up.
Wit, Whimsy, Wart, she said. Do you want more rights?
Wit shrugged, Wart didn't respond, and Whimsy stared pensively at her right hand before nodding emphatically.
Look, said H, smarter people than us have debated this topic for centuries. I'm allowing these girls all the freedoms I have to give. They work without being asked to.
Industrious, came a voice from behind them. They turned around.
Kenneth, said Al, you look like you had a good nap.
Guess that's all I needed.
He smiled at H. Thanks for patching me up. The mask smiled back. It was weird how much humanity shone through those dark holes. Jake squinted for the 50th time, trying to see the man's actual eyes in the shadows, but still to no avail.
I'm glad we could help, Kenneth,
he said, clapping the young man on the shoulder.
Was S able to find you?
Kenneth nodded. He seemed like a pretty nice bat monster. The lips of H's mask curled up like he'd just eaten something scrumptious.
He is, isn't he?
Al cocked his head questioningly at Jake, who shrugged.
Say, H began, how would you all like a tour of the facilities? We'll show you where the magic happens.
Do you mean that literally? Asked Al. As in real magic?
Of course.
H snapped his fingers, and a swirling blue flame appeared hovering over his palm. It danced and sparked, taking the form of a tiny horse which quickly folded itself inside out and bloomed into a bright red flower before dissolving into sweet-smelling vapor. The boys responded with a shower of oohs and wows. It was better than any OEV Jake could imagine.
Come on, said H. The lab's this way. VIP passes all around.